You're listening to Trending with Timmery, offering an eternal perspective on today's hottest topics. National speaker Timmery Millington has been a passionate advocate for life as long as she can remember, helping Gen X through Z answer the call to true feminism and authentic manhood. Timmery holds a master's degree in biblical theology, and she covers this week's hottest stories from a Catholic worldview. You're listening to Trending with Timmery.
We hear a lot about the war on women. Usually people are talking about the removal of abortion access in various states. Well, Father Tim Grumbach is with me today, and we're going to be talking really about the war on women, the challenge for holiness among women today, and how this has really led to a decline in men even being interested in women. So we'll be talking about the American Music Awards, some shocking performances. We'll be talking a little bit about some of the Game of Thrones stars and kind of their tell-all after the show and how they felt about the various scenes they engaged in. And we'll be talking about Venerable soon-to-be Saint Fulton Sheen. With me today is Father Tim Grumbach, whom you know very well. Father Tim, it's been a little while. What's going on in your land?
Oh my gosh, just the parish life is catching up, and it's been a real blessing because it's easy to look beyond what's happening in the building and what's happening in the office and try to run away a little bit. But God has kept me very close to the people, and the people very close to me in good ways and negative ways, and just His grace flowing through it all. And so it's really a joy to be able to come back down here after almost a couple months. It feels like I haven't been in studio with you, so this is a joy to be back. It's
been a while. You could tell Father Tim was missing it because he'd be like sending me things about the show every now and again. He's like, yeah, I can't wait to get back in studio. We have so much to talk about, and you'll have to bear with me because I am battling like 2 sinus infections this month that have been absolutely ridiculous. But I also kind of feel like that's the theme of November in many ways. We're getting ready for Thanksgiving and Christmas and all of the joy of the season, but also the busyness. Like, I think there's a reason that November 1st, we already have Christmas trees set up because it's a reminder of how busy the rest of the year is going to be.
Yeah, we have an announcement at the parish. We're selling Christmas cards, and literally in the announcement, it says, it's not even Thanksgiving yet, but get into the Christmas spirit. I'm like, oh, come on. We in the church should know better than this. But we've done well, getting people prepared, and we need an Advent for Advent, I think.
My challenge for myself this year is instead of sending Christmas cards during Advent, I'm going to send them right on time, have them all written ahead of time so that I can send them during the Christmas season, because it's not just Christmas Day.
Yeah, well, everyone knows that, that you're going to get your Grumbach Christmas card from my family the day after Thanksgiving, and so that's coming up real quick. So.
That is awesome. Yeah. I love it. Well, we are going to go ahead and slide into this first topic here, and that is that Venerable Fulton Sheen is officially going to be a saint as of December 21st.
Well, he's going to be a blessed, so he will not be a saint for some time now, but but it's really looking like it'll be that will be the case within a couple of years, maybe a few years, but this is a very important step forward.
Okay, I'm so glad you corrected me there, because it's funny because I was thinking earlier in the year, like, I thought there was still a long ways to go, and then I see this announcement, he's going to be a saint. My faux pas here. See, I'm telling you, I told Father Tim before the show, I am not with it right now, so you got to correct these things that we have going on that we're discussing. But I want to talk about a really important topic having to do with Blessed Fulton Sheen, and that is so many of the comments he makes about women. We'll be coming to that in a second. For those who aren't really familiar with Venerable Fulton Sheen, he's going to be named blessed on the 100th anniversary of his ordination. He was ordained in 1919 in Peoria, and the beatification will actually take place at the Cathedral of St. Mary's of the Immaculate Conception there in Peoria, where he actually became a priest.
Yeah, what a gift that it will be there in Peoria, in what could be considered a smaller part of the country. And his background is really, working on farms and learning a great work ethic and a faith life and an honest and humble prayer from his family. And so, there was a lot of controversy about where his body would be buried, where these ceremonies would be taking place. And now that that's finally been, come to a conclusion and they've figured all that part of it out, it looks like it's going to be in Peoria, and it'll be such a great gift for that community. So it's kind of between there and New York City. But to have it in a place that it really just speaks about who he is on the inside and his own self-understanding as somebody who, as a sinner in need of mercy, learned how to be honest in his faith by learning how to work hard on the farms. And even though it was something he says he hated when he was younger, it was something that formed him who he was. And so what a gift that they'll be able to celebrate that right there in his home.
Well, and when we look at him, for those who were not living during that era, he spent many years on national television at a time when, the number of channels and shows that you could watch were limited. And he had an audience of millions throughout his series called Life is Worth Living, which I have absolutely loved pulling up on YouTube and watching one episode after another. He's so passionate, blunt, clear, and full of really the love of God and the joy of evangelization.
And the gift of Archbishop Fulton Sheen was that he was such a prominent figure in the media, and we have kind of separated ourselves in so many ways as Catholics in the media. We speak of Catholic Twitter, Catholic YouTube, Catholic social media, Catholic media, but Fulton Sheen was not separated in that way. He was getting higher ratings than some of the top figures in all of the media at the time. Yeah. And so he wasn't just this great Catholic figure. He was a great figure for the whole United States, for the world to understand, right? Life is worth living, but to get this great image of the Catholic Church as well.
You want to live a happy life. You want to live a life with a good marriage. You want to live how to show love in our culture. These are all fundamental things that appeal to human nature that he spoke about. Now, I want to dive into some of his awesome quotes, which we'll really be discussing throughout the theme of today's show, because we're going to be talking a lot about, I would say, this war on women that isn't discussed. Whether we're talking about the Me Too movement, parts of the Me Too movement that aren't covered very often. One of the Games of Thrones stars ended up really giving this tell-all after the show ended, and it breaks my heart hearing these stories about her sitting alone in the bathroom crying while on set. We'll be diving into that, but it reminds me of some of what Venerable Bishop Sheen said. He talks about this one quote that you may have seen posted very commonly on Instagram in the Catholic world now, where it says, when a man loves a woman, he has to become worthy of her. And it basically talks about the greater her virtue, the more noble she is, the stronger her character as she pursues truth, justice, goodness. The person who is aspiring to be with her really has to aspire to be worthy of her. And I look at what's going on in our culture right now, and it's really led women to not be aspired to.
Mm-hmm. And I'm looking forward that we can, during this episode, dive more deeply into this, the gift of woman. This was something that was a very important part of the pontificate of John Paul II,
right?
Through the theology of the body and the Mulieris Dignitatem, the dignity of woman and the gift of woman, and how men can learn from women how to become self-gift, because that's the only way that we can discover who we are, is by giving ourselves away. And so, before John Paul II's theology of the body was really coming into the church in such a powerful way, we had voices like Fulton Sheen reminding of this as well, and kind of preparing hearts for that great teaching to recognize the way that the as women go, so goes the church. Mm-hmm. That we may have the question of an all-male priesthood and what is the role of women in the church, and this is a discussion that's never going to go away. It's always very important. But that at that time he was pointing it out, that this is an important question to ask, is how do we understand the dignity of women, and how is this going to help the church move forward in a faithful way?
We're going to be talking a little later on about how sacrifices are a fundamental part of who women are. Before we dive into that in the next segment, I want to talk about a quote Father Tim and I both discovered about 6 months or so ago when reading it was an apostolic letter from one of the bishops in Arizona, Bishop Olmsted, and he quoted Fulton Sheen, and he was talking about this idea of so many things are half done in our culture. And he ended up talking about how there are a lot of half crucified souls, and I'm paraphrasing, who essentially have come down from the cross after 1 hour on the cross, after 2 hours on the cross, after 2 hours and 59 minutes. They're not completing things. And he talks about how Christians are called to complete things the same as Christ completed things. Yeah,
and this goes all the way back to the beginning of Scripture. It's one of my favorite moments in all of the Old Testament, is right there at the beginning when the first woman is created from the side of Adam. The word plays are amazing. First you have Adam, Adam, the man, is made from ha'adamah, from the dust of the earth, and from his side, bana, is built the woman, not formed, not created, but built up. It's the same word that's used for temples and altars and cities. And so the woman is created and built up to be this place of sacrifice, to be this place that's almost like an altar, and a place where God dwells uniquely in the world, and a place where families are formed up. And so looking at the theology, the preaching, the teaching of Fulton Sheen and the church's love for the dignity of women, we have a lot to talk about, and it's all beautiful.
It's so full of the truth of what we're called to as men and women, and why when we get it wrong, what happens? Not only are women really, a war has broken out on women, but at the same time, a war on men. Men are no longer challenged to aspire to be worthy of the beauty of women in our culture. A major thank you and shout out to our sponsors. Solidarity HealthShare is simple to help pay for affordable, quality health care. They enable the community to share in each other's eligible medical expenses. You choose a doctor that you want to see. Even integrative and alternative medical treatments are eligible. Solidarity HealthShare helps pay for NaPro Technology and costs associated with natural family planning. Solidarity HealthShare is dedicated to both faith and your healthcare. Information is available at solidarityhealthshare.org. That's solidarityhealthshare.org. You can learn more about Solidarity at radiotrending.com as well. Also, be sure to follow me on Instagram. You can find me at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. Again, that's Timmerie. We'll be back on Trending in just a little bit, talking more about the American Music Awards.
Timmerie will be right back. Send her a tweet at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie, where morality and culture meet, offering an eternal perspective on today's hottest topics.
We're back. I'm here with Father Tim Grumbach, who is the associate pastor at St. Augustine Parish in the Los Angeles Diocese. He is always an excellent guest here with us on Trending. We missed him over the last couple of months. He's been a little too busy for us, Father.
It's good to be back, though. It's always good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And Father Tim is involved in so many ministries, not only in the LA Diocese, but even with Life Teen. Are you traveling to Life Teen this upcoming summer?
This upcoming summer, I'll be in Big Bear. And so I was in Texas last summer. They put me on a plane and sent me somewhere else, but they're keeping me close to home this time, which I'm really excited about. I love traveling, a little bit of a wanderlust there, but the gift that I'll be able to, this is my home camp pretty much, even though it's only been happening for, I think this is year 4 or 5. I should know. I've been to just about each and every one, but this year I'll be able to be hosting the camp, so I won't be just the priest, hearing confessions, doing Mass. I'll get to do all of that, but I'll also be pretty much emceeing the week, and this will be for the Life Teen, the high schoolers week up in Big Bear at the end of June. So that's really, I'm really hoping and praying that the diocese around will be able to send more teens to have that encounter with Christ up in Big Bear.
And if you know any teenagers who you'd love to hang out with Father Tim this summer, you can learn more through Life Teen about their various camps, and be sure to check out that camp up there in Big Bear. We're going to be talking today about Emily Clark, who is one of the actresses in Game of Thrones. Now, Father Tim, you sent this article over to me, and I'm really looking forward to talking about this in light of some of the quotes from Archbishop Fulton Sheen, Venerable Fulton Sheen, because this broke my heart when I heard it, and it really touches on, again, this war on women and this broken femininity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the powerful quotes that I came across about from Fulton Sheen about the dignity of women is sometimes the difference between how men love and how women love. And one of the things that men do often will be they will look for reasons to love, while women will look for reasons to give of themselves. And so we're always trying to calculate things, perhaps, and looking for ways to fix things, while women, on the other hand, generally will be looking for ways to be mothers, to receive life, to nurture it, and so to bear it out to the world. And we're kind of seeing the opposite of that in this situation, aren't we?
Oh my gosh, the complete opposite. For those who have maybe read the books, watched the show, we've talked about it a decent amount here on Trending and some of the major problems with the entire outlook and really the plot line of Game of Thrones, which we're not going to dive deeper into for this episode because we really want to talk about Emilia Clarke's testimony, where she ended up sharing in a recent tell-all how she couldn't say no when looking right in the face with a new script. She's a no-name actress. She really has the opportunity to play this incredible role for her, which is quite a big role. And she couldn't get herself to say no when suddenly she's confronted with this script and she gets it. There was a catch all along. She sees one new scene after another in her script for the very first show of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, she even describes it as with some explicit, a bleep ton of nudity. And to be able to look at a script and to describe it that way, and the way that she describes how uncomfortable she was just looking at the script, but how she felt she still had to go through with this because, she didn't have a name. She couldn't make this work out for herself and still be a part of the show. And the thing that drew my attention most to this article was her relationship with her co-star, Jason Momoa, who's become rather popular as well because of that.
Right.
And she says that he did really support her. But I don't know the show that well, but I believe he was involved in most of those scenes in which she would have been nude, and so explicitly so. But that she still says that he did protect her in some way and try to support her without taking advantage of her, and that he could use his voice a little bit to tell the directors and the writers, like, not so much of this. But,
and he encouraged her, it sounded like, to reject some of it. You don't have to do this. You do have a voice. You can say no. Yeah. But what gets me, Father Tim, is that abuse really does feed abuse. She was being abused by the script. He was being abused by the script. They try to make it sound like, oh, it's okay. You can say no. And she even makes it sound, Emilia Clarke, one of the actresses in Game of Thrones, as if she did say no and put her foot down at times. But really, how much? This is one of the questions I ask. This poor girl felt like she didn't have the right to say very much. She even says at one point that she didn't feel that she was worthy of requiring anything.
And while I said before that this is almost the opposite of the way that Fulton Sheen described the difference between men and women love, I would say maybe not opposite, but it's a distortion of it, is that women seeking to give of themselves, where men will look for reasons to love, and they will love, and women will look for ways to give of themselves. This is something being taken from her.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most disturbing things about this. And some people will defend pornography and other explicit images in the sense of, well, she wanted it. Well, otherwise she could have just walked away, and that's hideous to make that argument. But to look at this and see that something was taken away from her, and she recognized that, and it was really disturbing her on the set, and afterwards she could speak out about it somewhat strongly. One could hope that maybe stronger voices will come out against this as well.
I completely agree. That's Father Tim Grumbach. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. And looking at some of the quotes from Fulton Sheen, it really, really reminded me of Emilia Clarke's testimony here. Fulton Sheen talks about how a woman's love makes, quote, 1,000 small sacrifices, sprinkling them throughout the day and months. Their very repetition gives them the character of the commonplace. So what Fulton Sheen's saying is that it's fundamental, just a fundamental part of women to make sacrifices. In fact, they do it so often that it becomes commonplace. And I was thinking about this. Sometimes women allow themselves to be walked over a little bit. And this is one of the big, I think, complaints sometimes of the feminist movement speaking up, is that they didn't want women to become doormats. And in some ways, in some areas, they were being treated as such. Unfortunately, the pendulum swung too far in one direction. But then it started to feed abuse such as this. People begin to think that nudity and pornography and contraception and abortion are an idea of really, kind of making sacrifices and giving yourself and empowering you. But in reality, it's the wrong type of sacrifice. And I think that it's playing on the desire of the woman to make sacrifices, that they're giving themselves like, okay, I'm not really worthy to ask for less nudity in this scene. I'm not really worthy to ask to keep my job if I'm on maternity leave for 6 weeks. Women start to make these various quote unquote sacrifices, thinking themselves unworthy, when it's the wrong type of sacrifice, and it leads them to being abused.
Yeah, I love that you're using that word sacrifice, because so often we will kind of creating this binary sense, which could be overgeneralized, is that men sacrifice and women receive.
Right.
But both have to be able to do each of those. But to speak of the women as being able to sacrifice as well, I mean, again, that goes back to the creation of Eve in the creation story. And sometimes we'll ask the wrong questions about that. Like, is that exactly how it happened? But it wasn't seeking to tell us how it happened so much as why it happened, and tell us something deeply about who we are, created as male and female. And that, again, the woman created from the side of Adam, not from above, not from below, but from the side. Different, but equal in dignity. And that she's created, using the same word, built up like an altar. And that's what it means, is that a woman was created to be a place of sacrifice, to be able to make these daily sacrifices as mothers, biological or spiritual or both, in the sense that a woman who can make those sacrifices is living the way that God had created her.
And sometimes we'll talk about how religion is a little easier for women than men, because women are used to the receptivity element of how their body's created, even kind of the dependence on others from the fact that we're not as strong as men and we do need help with certain things. And so people say, because we've received so much as women, not putting us at any type of lower dignity, that we're more prone toward religion. And I think that it's because at the same time, it's easier for us to give. And again, this other side of the Me Too movement, where Hollywood has expected the actresses and actors, in fact, in Game of Thrones, to give of their bodies, to show nudity, for it to be no big deal, for these plot lines themselves to be abusive and manipulative. It shows that we've gotten the sacrifice wrong. And I think that that's where each of us can kind of turn in on ourselves for a moment and say, okay, if my whole life is meant to be a gift, the same way the cross is, what can I do to change how I'm interacting with the world around me? What false sense of sacrifice am I living out? I think sometimes we're so exhausted because we're trying to live a sacrificial life when some of the things we're doing aren't really sacrifices.
And that kind of sacrifice of the human dignity through pornographic images and explicit nudity is, you're right, it's a counterfeit, a manipulation of the sacrifice that a woman is called to. Women and men are called to. And it's diabolic, is what it is. When we look at the demonic, when the diabolic, that it cannot create. It is not creative, but all it can do is manipulate and counterfeit. And so, this is what happens when we can use the language of effeminacy for men, right? Mm-hmm. There needs to be a femininity that men can tap into in a certain sense of that receptivity. But when it becomes a distortion of femininity, then it's a counterfeit. The same thing with the kind of sacrifice that women are called to in their motherhood, biological, spiritual, is that when it becomes a part of art that is denigrating to the woman as a human person and to the dignity with which she is created, that's counterfeit, that's manipulative, and that's diabolical.
Let's talk for a second about spiritual motherhood, because this is something a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with. Did you know that all women are called to maternity? Now, that may be a biological motherhood, but not all of us can have children. Not all of us are going to have children. Some aren't even going to marry. I mean, there's a reason that the religious life is an option for women. That means we don't have to have children if we do not marry. We could go on. But spiritual motherhood is this idea that we're called to nurture and feed and mother people that are younger than us, maybe even of a similar age at times, but the spiritual maternity is fundamental to the woman's vocation. It's written onto her body.
And we look to our Blessed Mother for the example and to receive her heart, for her to give her heart to us and to see that she received the love of God. She literally nurtured it in her womb, and then she bore it out to the world. And so every person is called to that spiritual motherhood in a sense, but also especially women to look to Mary for their own spiritual motherhood.
You can listen to more of Trending via the podcast on iTunes or the iHeartRadio app, where you can share your favorite episodes. You're listening to Trending with Timmery.
I'm back with Father Tim Grumbach here on Trending. We're talking about this idea of this war on women. You hear about it because we're trying to get rid of abortion, and people think that to not be able to have access to abortion means that women cannot, quote unquote, be equal in society. But we were just talking a little earlier about Emilia Clarke and her role on Game of Thrones and her tell-all and the oppression that she really experienced and being expected to act in so many nude scenes throughout her career on the show. And how women are being led to believe that they're called to make sacrifices, but the wrong type of sacrifices that belittle and degrade them. Here to talk about this with me is Father Tim Grumbach.
Yeah, this war on women is something that is, it's a distortion and it's a counterfeit and it's a manipulation of the way that woman was created to be self-gift that throughout history, and we're seeing it even in something as familiar to us as Game of Thrones, that it's happening today where instead of being able to become a self-gift, things are being taken away from women and they're being told, no, this is how you give of yourself.
Yeah. And I want us to keep in mind this quote from Venerable Florent Sheen, where he says, when a man loves a woman, he has to become worthy of her. And later on in that same quote, he talks about how the more a man has to aspire to be worthy of her, it elevates him and who he is as well. And, you know, in looking at some of these stories that we're talking about today, man, women are being challenged to not elevate themselves, to not be virtuous. You know, growing up, I danced. I still dance as much as I'm able to. And I'll never forget, especially during college, during grad school, and after, I was constantly being targeted online with advertisements to donate my eggs because they expected, okay, dancers are going to be really healthy. They'll be able to donate their eggs. They'll have the healthier, you know, types of genes and so forth. The same time, I remember as I was finishing grad school, I started being targeted. Oh, do you have any student loan debt? Here, you can become a surrogate. You can donate your eggs. In fact, you can make $10,000 just in one round of donating your eggs. And if you do it multiple times, you could make $50,000. You could pay off most of your student loan debt.
Yeah, so frighteningly, a motherhood can become commodified and industrialized and sold away. And we're looking at how dangerous that is, not just for motherhood in general, but for individuals.
Oh, it's heartbreaking. You know, I was thinking about this just yesterday as we were preparing for the show. The day I was getting married, there was a woman who we hired to do my hair for the wedding. And as she's sitting in my apartment doing my hair, remember my sister Gabby and I are sitting there, and she's saying, oh, hold on. And she has all these timers that keep going off as she's doing my hair. And finally, she ends up saying, sorry, I have to keep taking my pill. She said, I'm preparing to be a surrogate. And she was also donating her eggs as well to contribute to this new human life that they were trying to create. And she was just doing it because she's living in Southern California. Life is expensive. Her and her husband are trying to make ends meet for her and her family. And this was a means to make more money. I share this story because I hear stories like this all the time that somehow very gently touch my life, but it shows how commonplace the selling of our own eggs and becoming a surrogate is in this culture.
Yeah, and the way that it's being marketed as well as a good deed, as helping those who cannot help themselves, to do it in such a punchy and entertaining way. Some of the images that we're looking at, some of the advertisements that we're looking at, it has young, attractive women dressed up like bunny rabbits, almost like here's an Easter surprise, bringing eggs. Another image is a little heart in an egg carton, as if a woman's ovaries are being compared to an egg carton of all things.
We're looking at an article from Public Discourse written by a friend of mine, Molly Sheehan. Excellent work, really talking about how these women are being targeted. I mean, continue to go through some of these images.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another one has an image of young Asian women, and the concern is that it's almost fetishizing or making these women look like these are the attractive possibilities. And so again, it's commodifying and industrializing not just motherhood in general, but these individuals. And it's doing a great damage to our understanding of the dignity of women as mothers. It's
been really interesting to me over the years to look at how surrogacy and the selling of eggs and the harvesting of women's eggs has really become so commonplace, and it's become a business model here in the United States. But in other countries, that's not the case. In fact, even in the Western world, in the United Kingdoms, they have much stricter surrogacy laws. I mean, we have other places as well that see this as problematic: India, Nepal, Thailand, where they're looking at surrogacy and they're recognizing it's exploiting women. In fact, it's targeting at times women of lower income. And so they've been very intentional in preventing the commodification, not just of the women, but of children that are being created through a contract immediately with the idea that they will have no right to a mother and a father, to their biological mother and father.
And I know we've covered it here before on Trending, is looking at the ways that these women have been caught up in different kinds of sex trafficking and everything like that, that this is becoming a form of slavery, not just for the children who will be sold away to other parents, but to the women, sometimes without their own consent, who are being caught up in this life and in this commodification of motherhood. It's
heartbreaking. And when you look at the stories, when people go into, for example, surrogacy agreements, the health care of the woman who is carrying that child often does not end up being covered after the birth. And often, because of surrogacy and because of sometimes the harvesting of eggs, there are many health complications that come along. I mean, just to mention some of the complications that come up with the harvesting of eggs, if you haven't seen the movie or documentary Exploitation, again, Eggsploitation, I highly recommend it. It came out about 10 years ago, but it talks about how women who go through the harvesting of eggs experience hyperstimulation of their ovaries, because they're not just trying to release one egg the way a woman's body normally would during her regular cycle. Instead, they're trying to harvest 10, 20, 30 eggs at once. This isn't how a woman's body works. And so they're putting her body through extreme trauma, again, hyperstimulation, sometimes loss of your ovary, sometimes infertility issues, sometimes risk of stroke and cancer. I could go on and on with the risks. This is how women are left when they think, oh, it's easy, just $10,000, quick and easy to obtain.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and this article also brings up a really tragic story about a woman who was, through this surrogacy, was going to have triplets. The father, who was really in no place to be a father, not having a home of his own, did not want triplets, and so he demanded that she have an abortion of one of the children. I don't think it was a happy ending to the story, really, is that an attempt to make sure that she could still have custody over these children, but legally it wasn't going to work out.
This was a heartbreaking story. Some of you may remember it. We talked about it actually here on Trending. The woman's name was Melissa Cook, and the gentleman was Shannon Moore, not a gentleman at all. He lived in the basement of his parents' house, already a very dysfunctional home. And even Shannon Moore, his own sister, after he was already in possession of these children, complained that he should not be caring for these children because he was not caring for them correctly. He put tons of pressure on Melissa Cook to have an abortion when he decided he didn't want the third child. And what's heartbreaking is that Melissa wanted to then keep that third baby. Okay, if you don't want it, let me at least keep it. And she was not allowed to keep that child. I believe that he ended up deciding to keep all three of the babies because the later and later on that this court battle proceeded, I think it became difficult to obtain an abortion for that third baby. But this is the reality of stories, happening right here in Southern California, happening there in New York, happening in Alabama. It's becoming so commonplace. Some people just don't talk about it because they know people are uncomfortable, but others are participating in this. I'll never forget one of the churches I was involved with here in Southern California. I remember there was this beautiful family, very Catholic, and some of the various sisters decided to start using surrogates to have children. And they had 8 children, 6 children, 5 children, and they loved it because their bodies didn't have to change. They didn't have to go through the pregnancy. They didn't have to deal with all of that and those issues. And they just take their children, and go to the hospital and pick up their new sibling as if it was no big deal.
Right. And one of the most disheartening parts of it is that the language that's even used here in this article is that the mother, the surrogate mother, is considered a legal stranger to the children. And so there's really no legal authority or responsibility for the mother of the children after she had sacrificed so much. And a woman knows the risk of childbirth far more than any man does. in that sense, even has a closeness to the risk of death that many men do not in their daily lives in that sense.
Again, this misperceived idea of sacrifice for women. That's Father Tim Grumbach. You're listening to Trending with Timmery. How far do women have to go until they see that they're being fed this lie? I mean, women are selling away their children. They're selling away their bodies for what? For financial gain. And maybe some of these women are in a serious, serious financial ruin and they need help. I think that that's where we need to continue to look to resources such as Children of the Immaculate Heart, which is an organization in Southern California that is trying to create a home to open up for women who are victims of sex trafficking.
And it's so important that we look beyond the issue itself to see how can we care for the women who are enduring these issues.
Right.
So we're not looking just at surrogacy. We're not just looking at abortion, contraception, and these things, but what can we do to help the people who are having to make these very difficult decisions? I remember just a couple of weeks ago, I preached against abortion during one of my Sunday masses, and one person came up to me after the mass and started telling me that, how dare I as a man speak against abortion? How would I know what a woman is going through to make that decision? And the discussion took the typical but still no less disturbing turn that they're so poor they shouldn't be having children. And I asked, are you telling me a poor child doesn't deserve to live? And that was pretty much what this person told me afterwards, and it was really disturbing to me. And this person said, you should never, ever do that again in church, to say that. And I said, well, I'm not going to be quiet about that, because we cannot let our discussion about this turn to the poor should be aborted. And so we're looking at the need to protect life at all stages.
Timmery will be right back. Send her a tweet at Timmery. That's TIMMERIE. You're listening to Trending with Timmery, where morality and culture meet, offering an eternal perspective on today's hottest topics.
I'm back with Father Tim Grumbach. Just before the break, we were talking about how Father Tim recently preached on the topic of abortion and how one of his parishioners came up disagreeing with him. Basically, the argument that's so common that, well, what about the poor people? Poor people essentially shouldn't have to have abortion, shouldn't be born into poverty. And this is a common argument that I think we should touch on just briefly. There are a lot of people, and we could take this back to the topic of surrogacy that we were just talking about, that they think that quality of life is a reason to do horrible, immoral acts. Whether it's, I'm struggling financially, so we think it's suddenly okay to harvest our eggs, and that's damaging for us as women and our bodies, or to become a surrogate, or we think it's okay to literally end a child's life, to kill a baby, because we think that quality of life will be less than what we determine is satisfactory or acceptable.
And it seems to be coming from a place of strangely misguided good intentions.
Right.
Of we don't want these children to suffer in poverty, because there are parts of the world that are, a poverty we can barely even imagine here in the United States, and we have some very poor places. But then to recognize that poverty and say, no, children shouldn't be born into that, and then to see abortion as a way of somehow protecting these children, very misguided, but good intentions, strangely enough.
Well, when we look at this quality of life argument, one of my perspectives that I've always had is I have seen woman after woman who have come to the abortion clinic and have changed their minds. I have seen women who have come to the crisis pregnancy centers that I've worked with over the years. I worked for 5 years in a crisis pregnancy center in Southern California, and I saw women's life circumstances change, their quality of life change. And so my question is this: are you telling me that we should determine whether or not a child should live or die, and whether or not a woman should go through the trauma of an abortion and the aftermath based on circumstances that are changeable?
Right. The women and the men as well. As I'm seeing that more and more in my ministry, is men who are wrestling with the decisions that are made, and sometimes feeling like they're not allowed to have a voice.
Right.
A friend of mine just asked me, as a man, how do I tell a woman not to have an abortion? And one of the important ways to do that is to begin framing it. This is really not an issue of women's rights. This is an issue of human rights.
Yeah.
And understanding that men and women should have voices with equal dignity, with different experiences, no doubt, different voices, but voices that are speaking out for the human rights of the child who is not being given any rights.
I want to bring this back to the topic of sacrifice that has been the theme throughout today's show. We've been talking about Venerable Fulton Sheen and soon to be Blessed, and how he talked about how making sacrifices is so commonplace for women. It's such a huge part of who they are that essentially they can almost be looked over. Well, the types of sacrifices women are being told to make or expected to make are what is really breaking their spirits and lowering the quality not just of women in our culture, but of men, because we know that men will aspire to the women, the quality of the women of the culture. And, there's a reason why so many men are just giving up, because we as women are making sacrifices at an altar, not of selflessness, but kind of this misplaced idea of quality of life or whatever it might be.
Right, and it goes back to the church's teaching. This was a favorite of John Paul II, that the human person is the only part of creation created for itself and will only come to discover itself through a sincere gift of self. Yeah. And that sacrifice takes on a specific way in a woman's life and a specific way in a man's life. And what a gift it is to reflect on the way that it expresses itself in a woman's life through motherhood and the sacrifices that come with that. Again, being an altar. Yet, what kind of sacrifices are being made? And is society convincing women to let things be taken from them, or to become a self-gift?
That's the dilemma that so many women face. You're listening to Trending with Timmery. That is Father Tim Grumbach. Father Tim, as you're talking about this sacrifice, it really just shakes me up as I think about this song that came out at the American Music Awards that was performed. Billie Eilish really performed this song called All Good Girls Go to Hell. She ended up winning 2 of, I believe, like the 10 nominations that she was kind of up for. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, Billie Eilish, she is quite a character. She, I think, began to get some popularity around the age of 13, 14, 15, as some of her singles were coming out. And she recognized that for her, music was a type of therapy. And that's what makes it so disturbing that she's getting more and more popular. Not that it's a bad thing that she's getting popular, but that something that has kind of been a therapy for her is now putting her in front of everyone. And now we're watching her deal with her issues. And in a sense, in a culture, we are taking advantage of her emotions and her feelings and everything like that. And watching her perform, I just watched this one song, watching her perform at the AMAs just the other night, is it almost looks like she's been taught to express herself, as you see so many models and images on billboards and on TV shows, is the woman looks bored. Like, this is something that should be bringing life. Music, telling a story through music should be bringing life, whether it be joy or whether it be sorrow. And she's just up there singing, and it's almost like she expects, like, I'm supposed to look bored doing this. And then she kind of gives this smile at the end of it, like, oh, that felt good for me. But the whole time she's performing, it's supposed to be like, well, this ain't no thing. This is I'm supposed to have so utter, complete control over my emotions right now that this is not supposed to be bringing me joy. And just listen to the song lyrics, all good girls go to hell. She and her brother apparently is a musician in her band. They were both asked about this song, and they say, well, yeah, it's supposed to be ambiguous. And so it's hard to look at the lyrics and really understand specifically what she meant. She will say the song is about climate change. It's from the perspective of the devil and looking at how humans have destroyed themselves, and that it's kind of a conversation the devil is having with God about, why are you trying to save humanity? They're already lost. You're going to want me on your team when they start fighting back. That seems to be what the song's about. Well,
what's so interesting is they kind of try to make it sound like an ambiguous meaning. You create your own meaning. Well, the devil is utter chaos. He brings people and things into chaos. The devil does not make sense. He tries to manipulate us, and God is perfect order. And so we see this song, and it just doesn't make sense. Is there a reason that songs such as this, that are ultimately singing about hell, and other songs not only are so catchy, but they're also so chaotic? They're, I think of this one song, it was a Queen song that I realized this summer actually says the word of a demon that we hear about in the Old Testament. It talks about Beelzebul. And it's so interesting because that part of the song is stuck in my head over and over again. And a couple months later, we were at a baseball game and my husband heard the song and he goes, did they just sing about a demon, essentially? And one of our friends is like, oh, you know, this guy went through a really tough part of his life. I can't remember the name of the Queen song. You guys know what I'm talking about.
I'm sure it's Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, and it's talking about like this conversion and the torment that he went through. And I said, I don't care what kind of torment he went through. We shouldn't be singing essentially about a demon. And I mean, same thing. There are all these songs about Lucifer and so forth that we glorify the devil in song. It brings us into chaos, yet it's so catchy that we just pick it up and sing right along.
Yeah, and watching the video of this performance by Billie Eilish, it's incredible just to see the people kind of dancing at their seats, and it's such a poppy thing that's happening. Yet the whole stage is made to look like it's on fire, resembling both hell and the fires here in California, and so it's kind of an ambiguous view of what the fire means. And it's just this pop experience of singing about hell, singing about the devil from the devil's perspective, and making the devil look like not such a bad guy, reasonable almost. I mean, that goes back to the garden. That's the serpent talking to Eve, trying to make God seem unreasonable. Did God really say that you couldn't eat from any tree of the garden? When God said you could eat from every tree of the garden, just not this one, for your good, because I love you and I desire your good. Yet the serpent will twist God's words. And so here we are. They are profound lyrics, hard to understand, but it's an interesting take, almost like a less engaging version of the Screw Tape Letters, trying to take on the voice of the enemy. And yet this song is an attempt to make the devil seem reasonable. And that's more frightening than anything that resembles actual worship of the devil, I think. But
to kind of wrap this whole show up together, we keep talking about women and this war on women. And then here we see Billie Eilish, and she's singing about how all good girls go to hell. Well, what altar are you sacrificing on? We talked about surrogacy. We talked about exploitation. We've talked about, the harm of the Me Too movement from the perspective of various actresses involved in things such as Game of Thrones and how they're expected to just show their nudity. Well, we're guided by our women in this culture and the level of virtue that we stand up to. Is there a reason that men are saying, I'm not even interested in dating anymore? Because the quality of women does not challenge them to aspire to anything.
Right. And another aspect of the song is that it refers to God as her. And interesting, too, because Billie has been quoted as not really believing in God or the devil. But if they existed, they would have a conversation like this. And now being able to make feeling that she's able to make a theological claim such as the femininity in God, using the pronouns that were not used in Scripture, not a part of divine revelation. But also what's misunderstood is that the masculine pronouns for God tell us something about who God is in his nature, is that he is not something that receives life from elsewhere, nurtures it, and bears it out into the world. He is this utter self-gift. And to understand the sexuality in a masculine sense is this pouring out of oneself. And that is what happens in the act of creation, is that God is not receiving something from somewhere else and nurturing it within himself to bear it out, but rather he speaks, he makes a gift of himself, and then we can, in that sense, use the masculine terminology that Jesus himself gave to us in prayer.
Well, and he's a good father, too, and we remember that. And I think so much of the brokenness in the culture are so many women looking for that strong masculine role model, that father who will protect them, lead them, and guide them. Thanks for being with us here on Trending. You can find Father Tim at Father Tim Grumbach or learn more about him at radiotrending.com.
This has been Trending with Timmerie. To book her to speak or learn more about her guest, visit radiotrending.com. That's radiotrending.com. You can listen to more of Trending via the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or the iHeartRadio app, where you can share your favorite episodes.